Hello everyone, I'm Laurine, a master's student in Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence at the Technical University of Denmark. Together with Mathias, Juan and Christoph from the Biometrics and Internet Security Research Group, DASEC in Darmstadt in Germany, we're glad to present our contribution to this third workshop on explainable and interpretable artificial intelligence for biometrics at WACV 2023. A principal component analysis-based approach for single morphing attack detection. But first, let's provide some context to this study. Today, many biometric systems applied in security involve face recognition. Even though these systems are highly convenient, research shows that these can be vulnerable to digital manipulations and physical presentation attacks. One of these consists of presenting a morphed image, or also called a morph, to the system, where the face of two different individuals are merged into one single facial image. When such a picture is used to fool a face recognition system and bypass then the security, we talked about morphing attack. Thus, the whole AI challenge focuses on detecting them. We distinguish two kinds of morph detection. The single image morphing attack detection, where only one facial image is presented to the biometric systems, and the differential one, where the presented facial image is compared with the reference. Knowing that different kinds of databases and different kinds of morphing algorithms exist, cross-database and cross-morph experiments are still studied in biometric research. In this paper, we focus specifically on morph detection in single image scenario. We propose a method that classifies a given facial image as real face, also called bona fide or morphed face. Our method relies on principal component analysis applied on texture features, which is the local binary pattern, performed on each of the red, green, and blue column components. Based on these texture features and color space decomposition, this method can be described as explicit. And we also provide an extensive benchmark to compare it with a deep learning approach by fine-tuning a pre-trained MobileNet V2. As mentioned previously, both cross-dataset and cross-morph protocols have been evaluated. Last but not least, this PCA-based method allows us to project images into a reduced vector space and to show relevant facial areas for bona fide and morphed images. This way, we're part of an explanatory dynamic to better understand how to distinguish a real picture from a morphed one. A bit more about the details of our method. First, we apply some pre-processing on the image. The face is detected, aligned, and cropped to produce a 500 by 500 size image, and we normalize it. Afterwards, we can apply the RGB split and extract the texture features, which is the local binary patterns in each color component. We can then apply a PCA and we project the images into the first 50 components for each color channel. After that, we can merge the three projections and we can apply a support vector machine classifier to classify the pictures as morphed or bona fide. In this study, we used three different databases. The first one is called FERRET, which is provided by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. The second one is called FRGC from the Face Recognition Grand Challenge. And the third one is FRLL, the Face Research London Lab database. Here we show a table with the exact number of bona fide images and morphed images for each database and each morphing tool. Indeed, we used 6 different morphing tools to produce the morphed images. For FERRET and FRGC, we used Face Fusion first, which is a private application that produces very clean pictures that even may fool a human. Then we apply OpenCV and FaceMorpher, 2 open source tools where strong artifacts still remain in morphed images, as you can see on this picture. And finally, we used UBO, which is an algorithm that relies on matching facial landmarks. Here we notice that the borders can still be seen if we zoom on the picture. For FRLL, we used FaceMorpher again, And we also used StyleGAN, a generative adversarial network introduced by NVIDIA researchers, and WebMorph, which is a face transformation software. Now let's dive into the experiments we conducted in this study. The first experiment, called Experiment A, focuses on individual datasets. It means that we're using the same database and the same morphing tool to produce the training, validation, and test set. For the split, we used 60% for the training, 20% as validation, and 30% for the test. Then, to ensure a fair training, we built balanced datasets between the two classes. Then, for the second experiment, called Experiment B, we have a cross-database scenario. It means that we're training on the database and we're testing on another one. Here, this scenario is a bit more challenging because we start to generalize our model. The model needs to use what he learned on a database to better classify another one. Finally, in the experiment C, we applied a cross-morphed scenario. Morphs are generated with the different morphing algorithm between the training and test phase. About the performance metrics, we used the detection equal error rate, and we also produced detection error trade-off curves. Here you can find the results of the experiment A, the individual dataset experiment. Here the first thing we can observe is that regarding databases, Ferret is more challenging than FRGC. If we look at the FRGC pictures, they are more homogeneous than Ferret. Then regarding morphing tools, FaceMorpher and OpenCV are easier to detect than Hubo and FaceVision. This fact also makes sense because Hubo and FaceVision are more complex algorithms. Finally, we observe that the deep learning approach performs better than our method, except in the case of a parallel database with StyleGAN morphs. Regarding the second experiment, the cross-database one, we can see that it's more challenging. Indeed, for both methods, errors are greater than individual dataset one scenario from experiment A. Then we observe that learning on Ferret performs better than learning on FRGC. We can interpret it in a way that Ferret provides a richer learning environment with more variety among images than FRGC. And again, our PCA-based method performs better than deep learning approach. In other cases, the deep learning approach is better. Finally, here are the results of our final experiment, the experiment C, on cross-morph scenario. Either we are crossing the morphing tool only, either we can cross both morphing tool and database. It's considered as the most challenging scenario, but we can perform better sometimes than individual dataset scenario. For instance, in the dataset with the Ferret database and the Hubo morphing tool, that was the most challenging one from experiment A, where we reached 18.18% as error. Here it's better classified when we train on FaceVision because we reach an error of 15.15%. Then we observe that our method performs better to classify the dataset with FRLL and StyleGAN when it's learning on FRGC. It can be on FaceMorpher, Hubo, or FaceVision morphing tools. Finally, we notice that learning on FRLL and StyleGAN produces better results with our method than the deep learning approach predicts FaceVision on both Ferret and FRGC. Let's know the most interesting part, visualizations. Indeed, a strong advantage of the proposed method is that face images are projected into a space of images, and we can discriminate this way bona fide and morphed image distribution for some cases in a subset of these principal components. In other words, we can study how a bona fide face image and a morphed face image can be decomposed, then study the principal components themselves by projecting them back into the image space. On this slide, we first focus on visualizing the best performance case of experiment A, the individual dataset one, with the FRGC database with face morphs, with a perfect classification on the test set. This way, we can better understand why the PCA-based method does work that well. First, by computing the distance between the average of bona fide and the average of morphed projections into some components for each color channel, we can determine the most discriminative components. In this example, as you can see in the table of figure 1, it's the first component of PCA performed in the blue color channel that is the most discriminative one. You can also see that this first component back into the image space here in figure 2. You have in reddish colors the positive coefficients and in bluish colors the negative ones. In figure 3, we compare the distribution of each class against PC1. We observe that for both training and test sets, we see that morphed image faces are positively correlated with the first principal component and bona fide faces are negatively correlated with it. Since a projected image in the principal component space is a linear combination of these components, it means that the face morphed face is, in FRGC database, expressed by using the face in PC1. On the other hand, a bona fide face in FRGC would contain its opposite. So for instance, since PCA is applied on local binary patterns, a morph is more likely to present local variations on the upper part of eyes, in the iris, on the forehead and on chin areas, the parts where it's more red on the PC1 visualization. So this is how we can interpret the vector space described by our method. Let's visualize another interesting case from cross-morph experiments, when we are training on a FRGC database with face morpher and predicting Stalligan morphs in FRLL. In this case, we saw that our method performed better than the deep learning approach, with around 20% of difference on the error. But can we explain why? If we look at the figure 1, which represents the density plots of test set coefficients against the first principal component of blue channel, we see that the two distributions are not totally overlapping. Morphs are more likely to be correlated with PC1 than bona fide faces. Let's recall that this is just one projection into a component, but the classifier uses 50 of them to cover more variants. To compare with images, if we look at the average normalized bona fide face, we see that there are not many noticeable variations in the local binary patterns in the chin or cheeks areas. Indeed, the areas are blue on figure 2, meaning that coefficients are negative. It confirms the idea that we previously seen, showing that morphed faces are more likely to contain variations there. We can have similar observations if we look at the average normalized morphed face, where many variations are observed in the forehead area, for instance, which is more red. As a conclusion, this work proposed the PCA-based method for single image morphing attack detection using local binary patterns for each RGB color space channel. We saw that even though a deep learning approach outperforms the proposed PCA-based method in most cases, the proposed method performs better on Stalligan morphs. Moreover, the PCA-based method can provide increased explainability, as principal components can be visualized back into the image space and coefficients distributions against them can be compared. Finally, cross-morph scenario should be further studied, since it shows low performance results.